The red dust is a patient thief. It steals the color from everything, leaving behind a uniform, monotonous ochre. It seeps through triple-sealed gaskets, coats solar panels with a film of fine grit, and works its way into the very folds of your mind, coloring your thoughts with its own desolate shade. For Dr. Aris Thorne, it was the color of last chances. His workstation in the Jezero Bio-Analysis Lab was an island of sterile white in a sea of red. Outside the reinforced plasteel window, the Martian landscape stretched into infinity, a grand and terrible emptiness that mirrored the state of his career. He was an astrobiologist, a seeker of life in the cosmos, yet had been relegated to the most lifeless task imaginable, routine soil composition analysis. It was a punishment, couched in the language of a critical support role. Everyone at his base knew it. They knew about the Ganymede incident. The false positive. The press conference where his confident announcement of microbial biosignatures had unraveled under scrutiny revealed to be nothing more than a chemical reaction in cryovolcanic ice. He had been so sure. The ridicule had been global. NASA, in its infinite, bureaucratic wisdom, had not fired him. They had exiled him to Mars, to a glorified rock-sifting job where he could do no further harm to their reputation. Thorne, status on core sample 7, AMA, a voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and devoid of warmth. Fallon Voss, the base director, stood by his console. She was NASA personified, ruthlessly efficient, hair pulled into a tight bun, her gaze assessing everything for compliance and protocol. Processing, Director, Aris replied, not looking up from the spectrograph display. The mass spectrometer is flagging some unusual organic compounds. Again. Define unusual. Complex mercury, organic chains. The concentrations are low, but they're consistent with the readings from 7, Eta and 7, Alpha. They're clustered, following a line that points north, towards the Nili-Planum fissure. Fallon sighed, a sound like sand shifting. We've been over this. Aris. Sensor noise. Contamination from the drill head, trace elements reacting with the perchlorates. The official determination is the inconclusive anomaly. Your job is to log it as such and move on. We're on a schedule. The administrator is expecting a full geological report by the end of the cycle. With all due respect, Kylan, this isn't noise, Aris insisted, finally turning to face her. The isotopic ratios are all wrong for terrestrial contamination. This is something else. Something native. The look on her face was a wall of ice. The word native is not to be used in any official report without irrefutable proof. Doctor, we learned that lesson on Ganymede. Did we not? The words were a surgeon's scalpel, precise and cruel. She didn't need to say more. She tapped a command into her personal datapad. I've logged the anomaly per protocol. Move on to sample 7, Delta. She walked away, her boots silent on the lab's grated floor. Aris watched her go, a familiar cold fury tightening in his chest. He was being ignored, his expertise dismissed as the lingering ghost of past failure. But he knew what he was seeing. This pattern wasn't random. It was a trail. That night, when the base hummed with the low thrum of life support and the other crew members were confined to their sleep pods, Aris slipped out of his quarters. The drone bay was quiet, a cavernous space filled with the dormant shapes of heavy, IFT rovers and atmospheric surveyors. He ignored them, heading for a small locker in the corner. Inside was a GO, Scout, a drone no larger than a dinner plate, designed for preliminary crevice exploration. Its range was limited, its sensors basic. It was a tool no one would miss for a few hours. Working with a frantic, secret energy, Aris bypassed the standard mission protocols on his datapad. He programmed a new flight path, a direct route to the fissure Kylan had mentioned. He piggybacked a high, and with signal relay through a decommissioned comms satellite, a move that was highly illegal and could cost him what was left of his career. He didn't care. This was no longer about his career. It was about the truth. He carried the drone to a secondary airlock, the hum of the cycling pumps sounding like a drumbeat of treason. He placed it on the regolith, the drone's small legs sinking slightly into the red dust. On his datapad, a camera feed flickered to life, showing his own helmeted face looking down. He keyed in the final command. The GO, Scout rose with a soft whir, a tiny metal firefly against the star-dusted blackness of the Martian sky. Aris watched it go, then retreated to the shadows of the lab, his heart hammering against his ribs. The drone's feed was his only window now. He watched as it skimmed over the cratered plains, a silent, speeding shadow. It reached the Niliplanum fissure in 20 minutes, a deep, jagged scar in the planet's surface. Descending, Aris whispered to himself, his fingers flying over the virtual controls. The drone tilted and plunged into the darkness. The camera feed became a mess of static and rock walls. The signal wavered. He held his breath. For a moment, the screen went black. A failure. He had failed again. Then, the signal returned. The drone had stabilized. It was in a space of impossible scale. Aris stared, his mind refusing to process what the drone's floodlights were revealing. It was not a cave. It was a world. Below, cutting through the utter blackness, were rivers. They flowed not with water, but with liquid mercury, shimmering and incandescent, catching the drone's light and scattering it in a billion dazzling fragments. And along the banks of these metallic rivers, great swaths of flora grew in impossible gardens. It was a kind of moss or fungus that glowed from within, pulsing with a soft, ethereal bioluminescence bathing the entire cavern in a twilight of blue and green. The drone drifted forward, silent and awestruck, its light sweeping across a landscape that science had sworn could not exist. An entire ecosystem, hidden for eons beneath the dead skin of Mars. Aris Thorne, the disgraced scientist who had been exiled for seeing life where there was none, now stared at a screen that held the greatest discovery in human history. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that NASA could never let this be known. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a revelation so profound it felt like a physical shock. He was staring into a new Genesis. For a full minute, he did nothing but watch the drone's light glide over the impossible scene. He forced his mind to work, to move past the awe. This footage was the most important data ever collected. It was also the most endangered. Kylan would bury it. NASA would classify it for a century, dismissing it as an equipment malfunction until they could figure out how to monetize or weaponize it. He had to get it out. With frantic urgency, he initiated the deep, space transmission protocol he had jury-rigged. The data stream began to flow, a torrent of video packets aimed at a distributed network of independent astronomical servers on Earth, a digital dead, and switch he had once conceived of in a fit of paranoia. The progress bar crawled. Every second was an agony. He imagined the network alarms screaming silently on some console in Kylan's office. He got to 7 before the feed abruptly died. The screen went black, replaced by a stark, red message, external comms link terminated by base command. Unauthorized transmission detected. Report to Director Voss immediately. The air in the lab suddenly felt thin, cold. He had sent barely 30 seconds of grainy, unstable footage. A glimpse. A fragment. Would it be enough? Kylan didn't wait for him to report. She was at the lab door within minutes, flanked by 2 security officers whose mission profiles had, until this moment, been focused on preventing psychological breaks, not insurrections. The face was a mask of controlled fury. You have committed an act of gross insubordination, Thorne. You violated 3 dozen mission protocols and jeopardized the integrity of this entire facility's network, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. What did you send? The truth, Aris said, his voice hoarse. There's a complete biosphere down there, Kylan. A cave sister. Bioluminescent flora and rivers of liquid metal. You sent unverified, raw sensor data that will be misinterpreted as another one of your fantasies, she shot back. You are hereby relieved of all duties. Your system access is revoked. You are confined to your quarters until further notice. We will review the drone's internal data logs and determine the source of this anomaly. She didn't believe him. Or worse, she did, and she was simply the first line of the cover. The security officers escorted him out, leaving him in the sterile box of his living quarters with nothing but his thoughts. But 30 seconds was enough. The footage, a flickering, ghostly vision of glowing moss and silver rivers, hit the public networks like a lightning strike. NASA's official statement came swiftly. We are investigating a sensor malfunction on a geological survey drone at US base. The resulting corrupted video data appears to be generating significant public speculation. We urge caution against drawing premature conclusions. They called it a glitch, a digital artifact, a trick of the light. But they couldn't stop it. The video went viral. It was analyzed and deconstructed by everyone from university physics departments to conspiracy theorists in their basements. It was dubbed the Mercury Garden. Aris Thorne, the disgraced scientist, was suddenly a figure of intense debate, a madman, a hoaxer, or the new Galileo. Trapped in his room, Aris knew the grainy footage wouldn't hold up forever against NASA's institutional weight. He needed more. He needed irrefutable proof. He needed a footprint. For 3 days, he plotted. He used his knowledge of the base's routine maintenance schedules, power grid fluctuations, and security patrol routes. He found a 4-init window during the nightly systems reboot when the internal suit, a sensor grid, would be offline. It was a sliver of an opportunity, a suicidal risk. On Sol 441, he took it. He slipped into the deserted suit A, the emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. Donning a standard EVA suit felt different this time. It was not the uniform of an explorer, but the disguise of a fugitive. He commandeered a light-duty rover, overriding its security lockout with a code he'd memorized months ago for just such an improbable contingency. The rover rolled out of the bay and into the Martian night with unnerving silence. Following the drone's flight path, he drove across the desolate landscape, the rover's headlights cutting a lonely path through the darkness. He reached the fissure and parked the rover behind a rock outcropping, hoping to shield it from any satellite sweeps. Armed with a sample kit and his suit camera, he rappelled down into the chasm. The moment he entered the cavern was like stepping into another dimension. The air in his helmet, usually sterile and recycled, seemed to carry a faint, metallic tang, a phantom scent his mind conjured. The soft, pulsing glow of the moss was all around him, casting his own elongated shadow against the cavern walls. He walked to the edge of a mercury river, watching the heavy, silver liquid flow with a silent, mesmerizing viscosity. It was real. All of it. He walked for what felt like hours, a lone human figure in a world of alien twilight. And then he saw it. A movement in the distance, by a dense patch of glowing moss. It was not a rock, not a shadow. It was alive. It stepped forward, into a clearer patch of light. The creature was slender, elegant, and utterly alien. It moved on 3 thin, articulated legs, its gait a smooth, treptal rhythm that was both graceful and unnerving. Its body was a pale, almost translucent white, and it had no discernible head, only a smooth, ovoid shape at the top of its torso that seemed to ripple with internal light. It paid him no mind, seemingly focused on grazing on the glowing moss. Aris stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat. He raised his wrist, mounted camera, his hands shaking too much to get a clear shot. The creature took another step, its 3-toed foot pressing into the soft, dark soil. It lifted its leg and moved on, leaving behind a perfect, sharp-edged impression. The shape was instantly, bizarrely familiar. It looked exactly like the Nike swoosh. Forgetting his own safety, Aris scrambled forward. This was it. The proof. He knelt beside the track, a perfect piece of alien calligraphy etched into the ground. He had to document this. He fumbled with his camera controls, trying to get the focus right. He angled the lens down at the footprint, trying to capture it and the glowing background in a single frame. In his haste, he activated the forward-facing imager. The camera snapped a picture, blurry, poorly lit, but undeniable. In the foreground was the alien footprint. Behind it, you could see Aris's own helmeted form, a ghostly, white figure in the gloom. And further in the background, a hazy but distinct silhouette, the 3-legged creature, its form captured just before it moved back into the shadows. He didn't have time for a better shot. His suit's proximity alert beeped. The creature, perhaps disturbed by his presence, had turned and was now looking in his direction with an unnerving stillness. It wasn't hostile, merely aware. Aris backed away slowly, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had his evidence. Back in the rover, Shivering with adrenaline, he rerouted the suit's short-range comms through the rover's main antenna, bouncing a compressed signal off the same rogue satellite as before. He sent only one file, the single, blurry photograph. He attached no name, no explanation. Just the image. Then he drove back to the base, slipping in just as the system came back online, a ghost returning to his cell. He didn't know if the transmission had made it. He could only wait. He fell into his bunk, the image of the wronged footprint burned into his mind. It was a symbol, an answer, and a declaration of war. The image hit Earth's networks not as a piece of data, but as an explosion. The blurry photograph became the single most viewed image in human history overnight. NASA's narrative of a sensor malfunction instantly vaporized. No glitch could create such a perfect, compelling tableau, the eerily familiar wronged footprint, the ghostly reflection of a human helmet, and the haunting silhouette of the creature in the background. It became a modern myth, a digital wildfire. The hashtag Martianic didn't just trend, it dominated global consciousness. The creature was given a name by the public, cobbled together from online polls and memes, the Tralalero. The world was no longer looking at a dead red planet. It was looking at a neighbor. The pressure on NASA was immense and unrelenting. Every news organization, every government, every citizen demanded answers. Inside us base, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Helen Voss was no longer just a base director. She was the warden of the greatest secret ever kept. The public furor had changed her mission entirely. She called a meeting with the base's senior geological and engineering staff. Aris was not invited, but the subject of the meeting was his data. Forget the creature for a moment. Kylan's voice was clipped and intense, echoing in the sterile briefing room. Let's focus on the environment that supports it. Dawn's initial analysis, the one we dismissed as noise, run it again. I want a full breakdown of these mercury, organic compounds. I don't want to know what they are. I want to know what they're worth. The geologists worked for 12 hours straight. The results came back, and they were staggering. The liquid mercury was not pure. It was a naturally occurring amalgam, rich in platinum, root metals, rhodium, palladium, osmium. These were some of the rarest and most valuable elements in the solar system, essential for next-generation electronics, fusion reactors, and interstellar craft. The Mercury Garden wasn't just a biological miracle, it was the richest mineral strike in human history. Atlas, the comet that had seeded this life, had been a cosmic treasure chest. Hallen's objective crystallized. The mission was no longer about science or containment. It was about extraction. At the Juggernaut's excavators, she ordered her chief engineer. Full mining protocol. We move on the Nili Planum fissure at 600 tomorrow. The primary objective is to establish a perimeter and begin alluvial extraction from the main mercury flow. Director, the engineer hesitated. A rare event. That's a fragile environment. We have no idea what effect our heavy machinery will have. Your job is not to worry about the local flora, Marcus. Kylan cut him off, her voice leaving no room for argument. It's to extract the resources this agency, and the people back on Earth, desperately need. That is the new prime directive. Meanwhile, in his quarters, Aris was fighting a different kind of war. He was locked out of the lab, but he had a copy of all his preliminary data on his personal datapad. The footage and the photo proved there was life. But his scientific mind was consumed with a more fundamental question. How? How could life exist in a cavern with a thin, unbreathable atmosphere and no protection from cosmic radiation? The surface of Mars was continually sterilized by it. He ignored the news reports of his own accidental fame. He dove into the atmospheric trace, as readings his drone had taken just before being cut off. He cross-referenced them with the soil composition data. He ran simulations, his fingers flying across the tablet's interface. A pattern began to emerge. A tiny, almost immeasurable surplus of free oxygen within the cavern, and a faint, localized magnetic field, a tiny bubble of protection that didn't match any known planetary phenomenon. It was strongest near the mercury rivers. It was the microbes. He isolated the signature of a microorganism in the soil samples, one he hadn't noticed before, overshadowed by the mercury compounds. It was a type of extremophile bacteria that seemed to be metabolizing the heavy metals in the soil. He named it Argentobacillus. His simulations showed it had two functions. As a waste product of its metallic digestion, it released tiny amounts of oxygen. Billions upon trillions of the bacteria, over millions of years, had created the thin but breathable pockets of atmosphere in the cavern. But the second function was the true miracle. The metabolic process created a minute bioelectric charge. An entire colony, covering hundreds of square kilometers along the riverbeds, acted in concert. Together, they generated a cohesive, low-level magnetic field, biological shield that protected the entire cavern system from the deadly radiation of space. This wasn't just a garden. It was a planetary embryo. The microbes were terraforming the planet from the inside out, slowly, patiently creating a haven for life. The mining operation wouldn't just be digging up dirt. It would be ripping out the planet's immune system. It would collapse the magnetic field, and the entire ecosystem would be scored away by radiation within a single Martian year. He had to warn her. He hacked the internal comms system, forcing a direct channel to Kylan's office. Her face appeared on his screen, furious at the intrusion. "This has to stop, Kylan," Aris pleaded, his voice raw. "You don't understand what you're doing. There are microbes in the soil, Argentobacillus. They're generating the oxygen down there. More than that, they're creating a magnetic field. It's a shield. If you send in those excavators, you'll destroy it. You will kill that entire world." Kylan listened, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Aris thought he saw a flicker of scientific curiosity, of understanding. Then, the mask of the administrator snapped back into place. "Your concern is noted, Doctor," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Another fantastic theory. But our mandate is clear. We have a duty to secure those resources. A duty to commit genocide." Aris yelled. "For profit. For progress, Dr. Thorne," she corrected him coldly. "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or, in this case, the microscopic." The channel went dead. Through his small window, Aris could see the floodlights of the vehicle base snap on, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. He heard the deep, earth-shaking rumble as the juggernaut excavators, monstrous machines the size of small buildings, began to roll out onto the plains, their destination clear. They were a steel tide, rolling toward the cradle of a new world, and he was the only one who stood in their way. There is no sound more final than the rumble of a juggernaut excavator. It's a low, grinding vibration that you feel in your teeth, in the bones of your skull. It's the sound of a mountain being turned to dust. Lying on his bunk, Aris felt two of them pass by the base perimeter, their immense weight making the very ground tremble. They were the pallbearers for a world they hadn't even met yet. Despair was a luxury he couldn't afford. Kylan had taken his access, but not his mind. He was a biologist. He understood systems, and our base was a system like any other, with vulnerabilities and pressure points. His gaze fell on a small maintenance panel near the floor of his quarters. Behind it lay a junction for the atmospheric reclamation and power distribution network. A beautifully fragile, dangerously volatile system. He spent an hour cross-referencing schematics he had memorized from his initial training with the base's publicly available power usage logs. He found what he was looking for, a secondary power conduit that ran directly beneath the security office. If he could create a precise, contained overload, just enough to trip the breakers and fry the local circuitry, he could trigger a level 2 fire alert. It would be a small, manageable electrical fire, but protocol was protocol. It would automatically seal the sector and divert all local security personnel to the incident. It would give him a window. Using a stripped power cord from his reading lamp and a conductive foil wrapper from a nutrient bar, he fashioned a crude but effective tool. It was a fool's plan, a desperate gamble. With a deep breath, he pried open the panel and jammed his device onto the exposed junction. The effect was instantaneous. The lights in his room flickered and died, replaced by the piercing shriek of a fire alarm and the pulsing red of emergency strobes. A synthesized voice echoed through the corridor, warning. Electrical fault detected in Sector Gamma. Fire suppression system activated. Evacuate area immediately. He heard the heavy thud of security boots running away from his position. His window was open. He moved through the chaotic, flashing corridors, a ghost in the machine of his own making. He made his way to a small, often overlooked emergency airlock, one used for waste disposal. 20 minutes later, he was outside, alone on the Martian surface, with nothing but the Eversuit on his back and the Juggernaut's tracks stretching like twin scars toward the Nili-Planum fissure. He couldn't take a river. It would be tracked instantly. He had to walk. The journey was a brutal testament to his own insignificance. He was a tiny white figure trudging through an endless, silent sea of red under a black sky. The twin suns of the Juggernaut's floodlights on the horizon were his only guide, a constant reminder that he was racing against the destruction of his own discovery. He arrived at the fissure hours later, his suit's energy reserves perilously low, his body aching with exhaustion. He descended into the cavern. The soft, bioluminescent glow felt like a welcome home. But the peace was gone. A low, persistent tremor now ran through the rock, the vanguard of the machine's approach. He had to understand the system, the web of life he was trying to save. His first encounter with the Tralalero had been passive. He needed to know more. He moved deeper into the cavern, following a tributary of the Mercury River. He found a herd of the treptal creatures grazing peacefully in a grove of the tallest glowing moss. He watched them for a long time, mesmerized by their silent, graceful existence. Then, the ground shook more violently. The lead Juggernaut had reached the fissure's edge. Its ground, penetrating radar sent powerful sonic pulses through the rock. The Tralaleros reacted instantly. They stopped grazing, their smooth bodies rippling with what looked like fear. A low, subsonic hum filled the air, a sound he felt more than heard. It was a collective distress signal, and something answered. From the shadows of the cavern walls, something immense began to move. At first, Aris thought it was a rock formation dislodged by the tremors, but it was alive. It was low to the ground, its body at least 10 meters long, covered in a thick, chitinous hide that perfectly mimicked the surrounding rock. It was the apex predator of this hidden world. The Bombardiro Crocodilo. It moved with a terrifying, deliberate speed towards the panicked Tralaleros. One of the graceful creatures was too slow. The crocodilo opened a maw that wasn't a mouth, but a gaping, circular sphincter. With a sound like a hydraulic press, it fired a super-heated jet of liquid mercury. The silvery stream struck the Tralalero, which convulsed and fell, its translucent body instantly cooking from the intense heat. The predator slithered forward to consume its kill. Aris watched in frozen horror and dawning comprehension. The predator wasn't drawn by the vibrations. It was drawn by the Tralaleros's specific distress frequency. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift. He finally understood. The Juggernaut's seismic scanners and, soon, their rock-chattering drills would be an overwhelming, continuous source of terror for the Tralaleros. They would broadcast their panic non-stop. And the crocodilos, the cavern's heavily armed custodians, would answer that call, drawn not to the prey, but to the source of the unnatural, terrifying disturbance. He didn't need to lure them. NASA was going to ring the dinner bell themselves. His job was no longer to be a passive observer or a failed diplomat. He had to become a shepherd. He had to get the predators in position. He scrambled back toward the cavern entrance where the mining was set to begin. He could feel the thunder of the Juggernaut's engines now, a deafening roar that promised annihilation. He was no longer just trying to save a garden. He was about to orchestrate a war. The first Juggernaut did not enter the cavern. It breached it. A section of the rock wall 50 meters wide exploded inward in a cataclysm of dust and shattering stone. The soft, ambient bioluminescence was instantly violated by the harsh, sterile white of industrial floodlights. The machine clawed its way through the opening, its colossal treads churning the alien soil into red, round mud. It was a mechanical beast of prey, and the cavern was its hunting ground. From a high ledge, tucked behind a curtain of glowing moss, Aris watched the desecration. The air, once still, was now choked with pulverized rock and the acrid smell of superheated machinery. The delicate hum of the ecosystem was replaced by the deafening scream of the Juggernaut's primary drill spinning up. The effect on the Tralaleros was immediate and catastrophic. They scattered in blind panic, their silent grace replaced by frantic, terrified movements. The low, subsonic hum of distress Aris had heard before now escalated into a piercing, multi-frequency shriek that vibrated through the very rock he clung to. It was the sound of a world screaming. And the world answered. They rose from the Mercury River like vengeful spirits, their camouflaged bodies almost indistinguishable from the metallic flow until they were fully emerged. 3 of the Bombardiro Crocodilos. They moved with a purpose that was terrifying to behold, ignoring the fleeing Tralalero entirely. Their senses, honed by millions of years of evolution, were locked onto the source of the unnatural, world-shattering noise. The Juggernaut's pilot, a man named Corporal Jensen, saw them on his forward display. "Director, we have multiple large, hostile biologicals approaching." His voice crackled over the open comm channel that Aris was monitoring on his datapad. "Define hostile." Jensen, Kylan's voice replied from the control room, devoid of any alarm. "They appear to be aggressive, ma'am. Moving fast. Closing distance to 100 meters. Your orders are to continue the mission." The Juggernaut's hull is rated for micrometeorite impacts. It is not threatened by local wildlife. "Begin drilling." "Roger that," Jensen replied, his voice betraying a hint of unease. The colossal drill, now at full velocity, descended toward the ground near the bank of the Mercury River. The moment the drill bit into the ground, the lead Crocodilo attacked. It was not a charge, but a fluid, calculated strike. Its circular maw opened, and with a sound like a steam cannon, it fired a cohesive bolt of incandescent mercury. The silvery projectile crossed the distance in a heartbeat and struck the Juggernaut not on its main hull, but directly on its external sensor mast. The reinforced composite optics melted instantly. Jensen's main visual display dissolved into a cascade of white static. "Director, I've lost visuals." Something hit the main camera array. Before Kylan could respond, the other 2 Crocodilos fired. Their targets were just as precise. One bolt of superheated mercury slammed into the articulated joint of the main drill assembly, the intense heat instantly welding the complex machinery into a single, useless slag of metal. The second bolt struck the primary radiator fins, which buckled and vaporized, causing the Juggernaut's core temperature to begin a critical, unstoppable climb. Alarms shrieked inside Jensen's cockpit. "The drill is seized. We have a core temp breach. I'm losing power. Back away. Jensen, retreat." Kylan commanded, her voice now tight with urgency. But the Juggernaut couldn't move. The Crocodilos, having neutralized the threat with terrifying efficiency, slithered back into the Mercury River, their mission accomplished. They were not mindless monsters. They were the cavern's immune system, and they had just neutralized a virus. As the crippled Juggernaut hissed and steamed in the darkness, its lights flickering and dying, Aris's mind was racing. He was running a deep-level analysis on the complex organic, mercury compounds from his initial samples, using his datapad's powerful processor to search for patterns. He had assumed they were byproducts of the local biology, but the complexity was off the charts. As the chaos unfolded below him, the results of his analysis scrolled onto the screen. He stopped breathing. The organic chains were not random. They were structured, arranged with a mathematical precision that defied natural evolution. There were repeating sequences, layered data, and embedded within the very molecular structure of the life around him was a primer on cosmic physics and elemental chemistry. It wasn't just a genetic code. It was a library, a blueprint, a message. The Comet, 3 Atlas, hadn't been a random celestial object that happened to carry life. It was a seed, a carefully constructed vessel, sent by a civilization so advanced they didn't explore the galaxy themselves. They gardened it. They had sown the seeds of a terraforming engine on a barren rock, programming its very DNA with the knowledge of the universe, setting in motion a project that would take 1 billion years to bloom. This wasn't just a discovery of life. It was the discovery of an intentional creation. Mars wasn't dead. It was incubating. A harsh voice cut through his revelation. Juggernaut 2, Kylan's voice was cold steel, broadcast on an open channel. Juggernaut 1 is disabled. Your new objective is twofold. First, neutralize the hostile biologicals. Your vehicle is equipped with high-energy sonic cannons. Use them. Second, secure the area and proceed with the primary extraction mission. Do not fail. The floodlights of the second Juggernaut pierced the darkness from the breach. It rolled forward, its massive form eclipsing the dying first machine. Panels on its chassis slid open, revealing the bell-shaped emitters of its sonic weaponry. They were designed to pulverize rock. Against living tissue, they would be apocalyptic. Aris stared at the advancing machine, then at the silent, shimmering garden around him. He now understood the true stakes. This was not a fight over a piece of land or a valuable mineral. It was a fight for a library of cosmic knowledge, for a legacy planted before humanity had even learned to walk upright. He was no longer just a biologist. He was the unlikely guardian of a testament, and he was standing at ground zero. Aris watched the second juggernaut advance, a lumbering god of sonic destruction. He knew a direct assault by the Crocodilos would be suicide this time. Fallon was prepared. She would trade creature for creature until the cavern was silent and she could claim her prize. He couldn't let it be a fair fight. He had to cheat. He had to use Kylan's own weapon against her. The sonic cannons were a sledgehammer. They were powerful, but indiscriminate. And Aris knew, with the certainty of a biologist, what a sound of that magnitude would do to the delicate sensory organs of the Tralleros. It would be an agony beyond measure. A distress signal amplified 1,000 times. A beacon. His plan was insane. A chain reaction of calculated chaos. He scrambled down from his ledge, his movements clumsy in the bulky Eversuit. He found a dense patch of the glowing moss, the food source of the Tralleros, and using his sample scoop, he scraped a large, glowing mass of it into a collection bag. It pulsed with a soft, green light, a beacon of his own. He moved, a tiny white figure, hugging the shadows, circling around the advancing juggernaut. He had to get in front of it. He could hear the pilot's voice over the comms, calm and professional. No sign of hostiles, Director. Area appears clear. Proceeding to initial drilling coordinates, Aris found a small cluster of Tralleros huddled in a shallow alcove, trembling from the lingering vibrations of the first battle. They were cautious, but their simple, grazing instincts were strong. He opened the collection bag. The concentrated glow of the moss was irresistible. He laid a trail, piece by glowing piece, leading from the safety of their alcove directly into the path of the oncoming machine. One Trallalero tentatively stepped out, then another. They began to nibble at the trail of moss, their fear momentarily overcome by the offering. They followed the path, a small, innocent herd being led to the slaughter. Director, the pilot's voice cut in. I have a group of the Treptal biologicals directly in my path. They seem docile. They are an obstruction. Pilot, Kylan's voice was ice. Clear them. Use a low-intensity sonic burst. We don't have time for this. Boja. Firing sonic deterrent. Aris braced himself, pressing his body flat against a rock wall. He didn't hear the blast, but he saw it. The air in front of the juggernaut shimmered and distorted as a wave of pure sonic force erupted from the emitters. The small herd of Tralleros convulsed. They didn't even have time to scatter. Their slender bodies were torn apart by the invisible wave. But their silent, agonizing scream was broadcast across the entire cavern. The subsonic frequency spike was so intense it made Aris's helmet display flicker. It was the sound of a nerve ending being set on fire. And from every shadow, every tributary, every dark corner of the cavern, the Crocodilos came. Not 3. A dozen. They rose from the mercury, a wave of armored, camouflaged fury, their senses screaming at them that the source of this ultimate pain and terror was the giant metal beast in the center of the cavern. Director. Multiple hostiles. Everywhere. The pilot screamed, his professional calm shattered. They're coming from all sides. Fire at will. Full power. Kylan commanded. The sonic cannons fired again, this time at full intensity. The Crocodilo caught in the direct path was brutally slammed back, its rocky hide cracking and shattering. But while it fired, 3 others closed the distance. They fired their mercury jets in a coordinated volley. One struck the sonic emitter, melting it into a useless lump. Another hit the juggernaut's main treads, welding them to the chassis. The third slammed into the cockpit's armored window, which crazed and turned a pack under the thermal shock. The machine was blind, crippled, and weaponless in seconds. The pilot's panicked screams were cut short as a Crocodilo ripped the entire cockpit from the juggernaut's body. The war was over. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any noise that had preceded it. But the victory felt hollow. Aris looked at the carnage, at the bodies of the gentle Tralalero and the slain Crocodilo. He had saved the garden by turning it into a battlefield. A single light appeared at the cavern entrance. It was a smaller figure, moving quickly in a streamlined, almost militaristic suit. It was Kylan. She was coming to survey her failure herself. She held a high-energy plasma cutter, a tool, but in her hands it looked like a weapon. Aris watched her stride toward the wreckage of her ambitions. As she passed a cluster of rocks, Aris saw something she didn't. Tucked into a small crevice was a leathery, pulsating ovoid, about the size of his helmet. An egg. A crocodilo egg, exposed and vulnerable after the battle. As if on cue, a surviving crocodilo, its hide scarred from the sonic blast, emerged from the river, its attention fixed on the lone human figure near its nest. Kylan saw the creature and froze, raising the plasma cutter. The crocodilo lowered its head, preparing to fire. They were at a stalemate, predator and administrator, both ready to annihilate the other. This was the moment. The choice. Aris could let the creature defend its young, let Kylan become a casualty of the war she had started. Or he could intervene. He scrambled down from his position, placing himself directly between Kylan and the crocodilo. He didn't look at Kylan. He looked at the creature. He lowered his arms, making himself as non-threatening as possible. He then knelt, slowly, and gently placed his gloved hand on the pulsing egg. He wasn't stealing it. He was protecting it. He looked back at the crocodilo, a silent message passing between the first human and the first Martian he had truly met. I am not a threat. I am a guardian, like you. The creature watched him for a long, tense moment. The circular maw, which had been preparing to fire, slowly closed. With a low rumble that vibrated through the floor, it turned and slid back into the Mercury River, leaving its egg in the care of this strange, soft-shelled being. Kylan stared, the plasma cutter humming in her hand, her mind unable to process what she had just witnessed. She saw not a scientist, but a man who had communed with monsters. Aris stood up, never taking his eyes off her. He activated his suit's external broadcast, his voice booming into the sudden silence of the cavern, a message aimed not just at her, but at the entire world that would one day listen to this log. You're not in charge here anymore, he said, his voice steady and clear. This isn't our world to plunder. It's not a mine. It's a nursery. He gestured to the glowing moss, the silver rivers, the impossible life teeming in the shadows. We thought we were explorers, conquerors. We were wrong. He knelt again, gently picking up the warm, heavy egg. We are not conquerors, he repeated, his voice filled with a conviction that transcended science. We are neighbors. The cavern does not measure time in hours or cycles. It measures it in pulses of light from the great moss gardens and the slow, silent flow of the Mercury rivers. By that clock, it has been an eternity since the battle. By Earth's clock, it has been 47 days. Kylan did not fight. In the end, her logic defeated her rage. She stared at me, then at the egg in my hands, and at the silent, watching darkness of the cavern. She was an administrator, and the situation had become administratively impossible. The cost-benefit analysis of trying to kill me was no longer favorable. She lowered the plasma cutter, turned without a word, and walked out of the cavern. Her retreat was louder than any explosion. It was the sound of humanity's first interstellar surrender. I am still here. I never left. The powers that be on Earth have declared the entire Nili Planum a biohazard quarantine zone. It's a lie, of course. A political fiction to save face. It's not a quarantine, it's a blockade. They can't risk sending another team in, and they cannot countenance the idea of letting me out. So, I have become the planet's first and only inhabitant. A hermit in the last place anyone expected to find a cathedral. My days are spent in a routine of impossible beauty. I study. I explore. I learn. The library encoded in the biology of this place is more vast than all the libraries of Earth combined. The gardeners did not just plant life, they planted knowledge. Within the glowing moss are the star charts of forgotten galaxies. In the genetic code of the Tralalero are the principles of faster than light travel, expressed as biological imperatives. This place is not a treasure chest of rare metals. It is a Rosetta Stone for the universe. To mine it would have been akin to burning down the Library of Alexandria, to toast marshmallows. The egg is my constant companion. I have kept it in a thermally stable niche near my makeshift camp, which I've established inside the hollowed shell of the first juggernaut. The crocodilos seem to understand. They watch me from the rivers, their ancient, alien minds seemingly capable of recognizing the concept of a truce. They see me not as an invader, but as the strange, soft nursemaid to their unborn child. I receive transmissions from Earth. They are a cacophony of human nature. There are threats from corporate lawyers representing the interests that Kylan served. There are pleas from scientific bodies who beg me for data I am not yet willing to share. There are messages of support from a global public that has turned me into a reluctant icon, a symbol of defiance against the very systems that sent me here. They have forgotten my failure on Ganymede. Or, perhaps, they have finally understood it. Last night, I felt a vibration from the egg. A faint tremor, a stirring of the life within. It will hatch soon. I do not know what I will do then. I have no training in the husbandry of Martian apex predators, but I am not afraid. Fear is the emotion of a conqueror, worried about what he might lose. I am not a conqueror. My final message to Kylan, the one that was broadcast to the world, has become the question that now paralyzes human expansion. Do we have the right? My time in this garden has given me the answer. The question itself is wrong. It is born of an arrogance that assumes the universe is a resource to be catalogued and consumed. It is a question asked by a species that has not yet realized it is a child in a galaxy of elders. We looked at Mars as a dead thing to be used, a stepping stone to our own survival. But it was never dead. It was simply waiting. We were the anomaly, the brief, violent noise in a billion-year-long song. Now, the song continues, and I am the only human privileged enough to hear it. This is Dr. Aris Thorne, sole inhabitant of the Mercury Garden, signing off. It is time to check on the future.